The bathroom mirror in the employee lounge reflected back a woman Jade Walter barely recognized anymore. Gone were the tailored Armani suits, the diamond earrings, the perfectly styled hair that graced the covers of Fortune and Forbes. Instead, she stared at herself in the crisp navy uniform of Skyline Airways, complete with regulation shoes and a name tag that read simply, Jade. She touched the small gold wings pinned to her lapel, the same wings she'd worn 23 years ago when she'd started as a real flight attendant, scraping together tuition money for business school. Back then, she dreamed of boardrooms and corner offices. Now, having conquered both, all she wanted was to disappear into the anonymous comfort of service. What would the board think if they could see me now? The thought made her smile for the first time in weeks. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Walter, you're insane, she whispered to her reflection, adjusting the scarf around her neck. But the CEO of Skyline Airways, the woman who turned a failing regional carrier into a billion-dollar empire, needed this. She needed to remember what it felt like to serve instead of command, to blend in instead of stand out, to be seen as just human. The intercom crackled. Flight 447 crew, report to Gate B12. Jade grabbed her regulation handbag, took a deep breath, and walked toward the gate. For the next 6 hours to Los Angeles, she wouldn't be the most powerful woman in aviation. She'd be Jade, just another flight attendant trying to make passengers comfortable at 30,000 feet. She had no idea that comfort would be the last thing on anyone's mind. 3 terminals away, another story was unfolding. John Morgan sat in the first-class lounge, his hand shaking as he read the same paragraph of legal documents for the 4th time. The words blurred together. Irreconcilable differences, division of assets, custody arrangements. 25 years of marriage, reduced to legal jargon. He downed his 3rd scotch and checked his Rolex, the one Rebecca had given him for their 20th anniversary, back when she still looked at him like he hung the moon. Now she looked at him like he was a stranger who'd overstayed his welcome in her life. Mr. Morgan? A young woman in a Skyline Airways uniform approached. We're ready to begin boarding your flight. He didn't look up. I'll board when I'm ready. The woman's smile faltered. Sir, you have a first-class seat, so you can board any time during our priority boarding, but I said I'll board when I'm ready. His voice carried the sharp edge that had intimidated junior executives for decades, the edge that no longer worked on Rebecca, that no longer impressed his partners, that no longer seemed to matter to anyone who mattered. The young woman nodded and retreated. John crumpled the divorce papers and shoved them into his briefcase. At 52, he was starting over, something he'd never imagined he'd have to do. His consulting firm was hemorrhaging clients. Rebecca was taking half of everything, and his own daughter barely returned his calls anymore. He stood unsteadily, the alcohol making his vision slightly fuzzy. At least on the plane, he'd be John Morgan, first-class passenger, man of importance. At least there, people would still have to treat him with respect. At least there, he could still matter. He gathered his things and walked toward the gate, unaware that his need to matter was about to collide with someone else's need to disappear, and that collision would change both their lives forever. The Boeing 737 hummed with the familiar energy of boarding, rolling luggage, overhead compartments slamming, the gentle chaos of 300 people finding their temporary homes in the sky. Jade moved through the cabin with practiced grace, her muscle memory from decades ago flowing back effortlessly. "Welcome aboard." She smiled at an elderly couple struggling with their carry-on. "Here, let me help you with that." "Thank you, dear," the woman said warmly. "You're so kind." When was the last time someone called me kind? Jade thought, settling them into their seats. In boardrooms, she was called brilliant, ruthless, visionary. But kind, that word had vanished from her vocabulary somewhere between hostile takeovers and quarterly earnings reports. She was adjusting overhead bins when she noticed him, John Morgan, settling into seat 2A with the careful movements of someone trying not to appear intoxicated. His expensive suit couldn't hide the defeat in his shoulders, the way his hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with his seatbelt. "Good afternoon, Mr. Morgan," Jade said professionally, checking her passenger manifest. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" John looked up, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. For a moment, something flickered across his face, surprise at being recognized, maybe even gratitude. But then his gaze sharpened, taking in her uniform, her name tag, her dark skin. "Yeah," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. "You can tell me why airlines hire people who can barely speak English to work first class." The casual cruelty hit Jade like a physical blow. Conversations around them died. She felt the weight of every passenger stare, the familiar burn of humiliation rising in her chest, the same feeling she'd carried from childhood through corporate America, the feeling that no matter how successful she became, some people would always see her as less than. "Sir," she said quietly, maintaining her professional composure, "I'm happy to assist you with anything you need for your flight." John leaned back in his seat, emboldened by the alcohol and his captive audience. "Oh, you speak English after all. That's progress." He looked around the cabin, his voice getting louder. "Though I have to say, standards have really dropped. When I started flying first class 20 years ago, flight attendants actually looked professional. Classy. Not like—" He waved his hand dismissively at Jade. The words hung in the air like poison. Jade felt her carefully constructed armor cracking, felt the girl who'd been followed around stores, who'd been passed over for promotions, who'd been told she didn't fit the culture, trying to claw her way to the surface. An older black gentleman in 3C started to rise. "Hey, that's enough." "It's okay," Jade said quickly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "Sir," she addressed John directly, "I understand you may be having a difficult day, but I need to ask that you treat all crew members with respect." John's laugh was bitter, sharp. "Respect? You want respect?" He pulled out his phone, waving it like a weapon. "I'm John Morgan. I've flown 2 million miles on airlines that actually care about their passengers. I spend more on flights in a year than you make in 5. And you want to lecture me about respect?" The cabin was dead silent now. Even the flight attendants in the galley had stopped what they were doing. Jade felt 300 pairs of eyes on her, felt the familiar weight of representing not just herself, but everyone who looked like her, everyone who'd ever been made to feel small. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every corner of the cabin. "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their job, their background, or what they look like." John's face flushed red. The scotch, the divorce papers, the crumbling life, it all rushed to the surface. "Don't you dare try to shame me," he snarled. "I know exactly what this is. You people always play the victim, always looking for someone to blame for your problems instead of—" "That's enough." The voice came from 4B, a young mother with 2 small children. There are kids on this plane. But John was beyond caring. The need to hurt someone, to make someone else feel as powerless as he felt, consumed him. Instead of what? Working your way up. Oh wait, you did work your way up. All the way to flight attendant. His voice dripped with venom. Must be proud of that achievement. Jade closed her eyes for just a moment, feeling something fundamental break inside her chest. When she opened them, her voice was perfectly calm, perfectly professional. Mr. Morgan, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and stop using inappropriate language. We have a full flight today, and everyone deserves to travel comfortably. Comfortable. John laughed harshly. You know what would make me comfortable? Not having to deal with. He paused, seeming to realize he was about to cross a line even his alcohol-soaked brain recognized as dangerous. But the damage was done. The words he didn't say hung in the air as powerfully as the ones he did. Every passenger knew exactly what he meant. Jade knew exactly what he meant. She stood there in her crisp uniform, feeling simultaneously invisible and hypervisible, powerful and powerless. Around her, she could hear murmurs of disgust, see passengers shaking their heads, feel the collective shame and anger of 300 people who'd just witnessed something ugly and unnecessary. I'll be right back, she said quietly, and walked toward the galley on legs that somehow still carried her despite feeling like they might give out at any moment. Behind her, John Morgan slumped in his seat, the temporary satisfaction of his cruelty already curdling into something that tasted like ash. He'd gotten what he wanted. He'd made someone else feel small. But somehow, it only made him feel smaller. The plane continued its preparations for takeoff, but something had shifted in the cabin. A line had been crossed, and unbeknownst to everyone aboard, the most powerful woman in aviation was standing in the galley, staring at her hands, and making a decision that would change everything. In the galley, Jade gripped the edge of the metal counter so tightly her knuckles went white. 23 years of boardroom battles, hostile takeovers, and glass ceiling shattering, and she was undone by a drunk passenger's racism on a Tuesday afternoon. You okay, honey? Maria, the lead flight attendant, appeared beside her with concerned eyes. That man was completely out of line. We can have security remove him when we land. Jade nodded without speaking, not trusting her voice. If only Maria knew that with a single phone call, Jade could have John Morgan banned from every Skyline Airways flight for life. She could make one call and ensure he never flew with any of their partner airlines either. She wielded that kind of power. But standing here in this galley, wearing this uniform, she felt as powerless as she had at 22, serving coffee to men who looked right through her. I'm fine, she finally managed, her voice hoarse. Just need a moment. Maria squeezed her shoulder. Take all the time you need. I'll handle first class. Alone again, Jade closed her eyes and tried to summon the woman who commanded boardrooms, who'd stared down CEOs twice her age, who'd built an empire from nothing. But all she could feel was the burning shame of being reduced to a stereotype in front of 300 strangers. This is exactly why you stopped flying coach, a voice in her head whispered. This is why you have private jets and executive lounges, so you never have to deal with people like him. But that wasn't true, was it? People like John Morgan existed in boardrooms too. They just hit it better. They used words like cultural fit and leadership potential. They smiled to her face and questioned her decisions behind closed doors. She pulled out her phone, her finger hovering over her assistant's number. One call. That's all it would take. Patricia, I need you to pull all information on passenger John Morgan. C2A on Flight 447. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of the young mother who'd spoken up, or the elderly gentleman who'd started to defend her. Maybe it was the realization that hiding behind her power wouldn't heal the wound John's words had torn open. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. Back in first class, John Morgan was discovering that momentary satisfaction had a very short shelf life. The woman across the aisle, a professional-looking Hispanic woman in her 40s, hadn't stopped staring at him with undisguised disgust. The businessman behind him had muttered "asshole" just loud enough for John to hear. Even the flight attendants moved around him with careful, cold professionalism. Good, he told himself, downing the rest of his drink. Let them judge me. They don't know what I'm going through. They don't know what it's like to lose everything. But the justification felt hollow. He could still see the flight attendant's face, Jade. Her name tag had read, the moment his words hit her. The careful composure that couldn't quite mask the pain underneath. She deserved it, he thought desperately. Always playing the victim, always making everything about race. Except, she hadn't played the victim, had she? She'd been nothing but professional. Even when he'd hurled his worst at her, she'd maintained her dignity, asked him politely to lower his voice. She'd protected the other passengers, while he'd acted like a child throwing a tantrum. John's phone buzzed. A text from his daughter Emma. "Dad, I heard about you and Mom. Are you okay? Call me." He stared at the message, his throat tightening. What would Emma think if she'd seen him 5 minutes ago? His brilliant, compassionate daughter who'd majored in social justice, who worked for a nonprofit, who'd raised money for racial equality organizations since high school. She'd be ashamed of him. Completely, utterly ashamed. But I'm not racist, he told himself. I was just angry. Hurt. I didn't mean. Didn't mean what? Every word had been chosen to cause maximum damage. He'd looked at that woman and decided to use her race, her job, her presumed background as weapons against her. How was that not racist? The plane began to taxi, and John found himself watching Jade through the galley curtain. She was checking safety equipment with the other flight attendants, her movements precise, professional. But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself, just a little too rigidly. You broke something in her, a voice whispered in his mind. And for what? To feel powerful for 5 minutes? His phone buzzed again. "Emma, Dad? I'm worried about you. Please call." John closed his eyes, trying to summon the righteous anger that had carried him through the confrontation. But all he could feel was a crushing weight of self-loathing. In the span of 10 minutes, he'd become someone he didn't recognize, someone his daughter would be ashamed to call father. The plane turned toward the runway, engines growing louder. Around him, passengers settled in for the 6-hour flight to Los Angeles. 6 hours sitting 30 feet from the woman he'd just humiliated. 6 hours to think about what kind of man he'd become. 6 hours to figure out if there was any way back from this. In the main cabin, passengers whispered in small groups. The incident had rippled through the plane, like a stone thrown in still water. "Did you hear what that man said to her?" Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. "She handled it better than I would have. Someone should report him." But gradually, as the plane prepared for takeoff, conversations turned to other things. Vacation plans, business meetings, family visits. The moment of ugliness became just another story to tell later, another example of how terrible people could be. Only 2 people on Flight 447 could move on. In the galley, Jade Walter, CEO of Skyline Airways, practiced her safety demonstration gestures, and tried not to think about how small one man's hatred had made her feel. In seat 2A, John Morgan, recently divorced consultant, stared out the window at the runway lights and wondered if it was possible to hate yourself to death. Neither knew that turbulence was about to force them into the same space again, and neither could imagine how much they both needed what was about to happen next. The first sign of trouble came 40 minutes into the flight, when Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom with barely concealed tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected weather patterns ahead. We're going to need to make an unscheduled stop in Denver for refueling and to wait out a storm system. We apologize for any inconvenience." Jade felt the plane bank sharply to the right, her practiced balance automatically adjusting to the movement. Around her, passengers groaned and pulled out phones to check connections. But she knew this wasn't just weather. She'd seen the radar reports earlier. This was going to be a long delay. What she didn't expect was the mechanical failure. Denver International Airport, 3 hours later. The massive terminal stretched endlessly under fluorescent lights as nearly 300 passengers from Flight 447 found themselves stranded overnight. A hydraulic leak had been discovered during the weather inspection. Nothing dangerous, but enough to ground the plane until morning. Due to the late hour and limited availability, the gate agent announced over increasingly frustrated murmurs, "We've secured rooms at the airport hotel for our first-class passengers. Everyone else will receive meal vouchers and can make use of the terminal's rest areas." Jade stood near the gate, still in her uniform, watching the chaos unfold. She could see Maria distributing vouchers, other crew members trying to answer questions they didn't have answers to. The passengers were tired, frustrated, and looking for someone to blame. "This is absolutely unacceptable," a voice boomed across the waiting area. John Morgan stood at the customer service counter, his earlier alcohol consumption having evolved into a dull, persistent headache that only sharpened his anger. "I have an important meeting tomorrow morning. I pay for first-class service, and this is what I get." The young customer service agent, barely 22, Jade guessed, looked like she wanted to disappear. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but the mechanical issue is for everyone's safety." "Safety?" John's voice carried that same edge from earlier. "Or is this airline just incompetent? Maybe you should hire people who actually know how to maintain aircraft instead of—" "That's enough." The words were out of Jade's mouth before she could stop them. Every head in the gate area turned. John's face went white as he recognized her voice. Jade walked slowly toward the counter, her heart hammering but her expression calm. This young woman is trying to help 300 passengers with a situation completely beyond her control. The maintenance team discovered a potential safety issue and grounded the plane. Would you prefer they ignored it? John stared at her, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Around them, other passengers began to nod and murmur agreement. "Furthermore," Jade continued, her voice carrying the authority she usually reserved for board meetings, "these customer service agents have been working for 12 hours straight trying to accommodate everyone. The least you can do is treat them with basic human decency." The young agent looked at Jade with obvious gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "What hotel room number?" Jade asked quietly. Your crew, so you'd be in." The agent checked her screen. "Room 1247. But, sir," she turned to John, "you're in 1249. The rooms are right next to each other." The cosmic irony wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Several passengers actually chuckled. John grabbed his key card without a word and stalked toward the hotel shuttle area. Jade followed a few minutes later, after helping the customer service agent organize meal vouchers for the families with young children. The airport Marriott was exactly what Jade expected: generic carpet, the smell of industrial cleaning supplies, and the particular exhaustion that only stranded travelers understood. She found herself in the elevator with John, both of them staring at the floor numbers like they held the secrets of the universe. 12. John said quietly as the doors opened. They walked down the hallway in silence, stopping at their respective doors. Jade had her key card out when she heard him speak. John's voice cracked slightly. What I said earlier. On the plane. That wasn't. I don't usually. Jade turned to face him. Up close, without the airplane lighting, she could see how exhausted he looked. How defeated. The expensive suit couldn't hide the man inside, who was barely holding himself together. Don't, she said quietly. Don't explain it away. Don't tell me you're not usually like that. You were like that today. To me. In front of 300 people. John nodded, his shoulders sagging. You're right. I was. And I. He looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix it, but I'm sorry. Jade studied his face. She'd heard 1,000 apologies in her career, from executives caught in scandals, from board members who'd crossed lines, from politicians trying to save face. Most of them were calculated, strategic, designed to minimize damage. This one sounded different. This one sounded like it hurt. Apology noted, she said simply, and turned back to her door. Wait. John's voice stopped her. I know you probably think I'm just some racist asshole, but my daughter, she's about your age, I think. Works for a non-profit, fights for social justice. If she'd seen me today. His voice broke completely. She'd never speak to me again. And she'd be right. Jade turned back around, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the angry passenger from seat 2A, but a broken man trying to figure out how he'd become someone he didn't recognize. Then don't be that person tomorrow, she said simply. Before he could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID made her freeze. Patricia, executive assistant. Excuse me, she said to John, answering quickly. Patricia, what's wrong? Ms. Walter. Thank God. We've been trying to reach you for hours. There's an emergency board meeting about the Denver incident. Apparently, there are already social media posts about passenger complaints, and... Jade could see John watching her, confusion spreading across his face as he registered her last name, the formal tone of the conversation, the way she was suddenly speaking with completely different authority. Patricia, I'll call you back in 5 minutes, she said, hanging up quickly. But it was too late. John was staring at her like he was seeing a ghost. Walter, he said slowly. Jade Walter, as in J. Walter, the CEO of Skyline Airways. The hallway stretched between them, suddenly feeling both infinite and impossibly small. Jade looked at this man who'd humiliated her, who'd apologized to her, who was now staring at her with dawning horror as he realized exactly who he'd been talking to. Yes, she said quietly. That would be me. The silence that followed was so complete. Jade could hear her own heartbeat. John Morgan, who'd spent the day feeling powerless, had just discovered he'd racially abused the most powerful woman in aviation. And Jade Walter, who'd spent her career building walls between herself and moments like this, was standing in a hotel hallway at midnight, her disguise finally stripped away. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Because they both knew that everything, absolutely everything, had just changed. The hotel hallway stretched between them like a chasm. John's face had gone completely white, his hands trembling as the full weight of his situation crashed down on him. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh my God. You could have me arrested. You could ruin my life. You could." "I could," Jade said quietly, sliding her key card into the door. "But I won't." She disappeared into her room, leaving John standing alone in the hallway, staring at the closed door like it might hold answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Inside room 1247, Jade sat on the edge of the bed, still in her flight attendant uniform, and let herself remember. Chicago, 1995. O'Hare International Airport. She was 24, 6 months out of Northwestern with an MBA she'd paid for by working double shifts serving coffee at 30,000 feet. Her interview suit was borrowed, her confidence manufactured, but her determination was absolutely real. "Ms. Washington," the interviewer had said, reading from her resume. She'd been Jade Washington then, before marriage and divorce had given her Walter. "Very impressive credentials. But I have to ask, are you sure you want to leave the service industry? Flight attending is good, honest work. Some people are just more suited to it." The subtext was clear. People like you. She'd gotten the job anyway, junior analyst at a struggling regional airline. She'd worked 18-hour days, taken on projects no one else wanted, made herself indispensable. When the company was facing bankruptcy 3 years later, she was the one who'd crafted the turnaround plan. She'd also been the one who was passed over when they promoted the white man who'd presented her plan to the board. "We just felt Derek had more of a leadership presence," her boss had explained. "You understand." She'd understood perfectly, and she'd quit the next day. The hostile takeover of that same airline 10 years later, the one that made her reputation in the industry, had been personally satisfying in ways that still made her smile. But tonight, sitting in this sterile hotel room, she wondered if all her success had just been an elaborate way of avoiding moments like the one on the plane, when she could be reduced to nothing but her race and someone else's assumptions in a matter of seconds. Her phone buzzed. "Patricia again. The board is furious about the social media coverage," her assistant said without preamble. "Passengers are posting videos of the incident. Hashtag Skyline Racism is trending. They want to know why you haven't responded." Jade closed her eyes. Of course passengers had filmed it. Everything was content now. Her humiliation was going viral while she sat in a hotel room, wearing the uniform she'd thought would make her invisible. "What videos?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "About 12 so far. Most of them show the passenger, a John Morgan, verbally abusing you. The comments are, well, people are calling for his head, and praising how professionally you handled it." "But Jade," Patricia's voice dropped, "the board doesn't know it was you. They think it was just a regular flight attendant." Jade laughed bitterly. "Right, because the CEO of Skyline Airways would never be confused for just a flight attendant." "What do you want me to tell them?" Before Jade could answer, she heard a soft knock at her door. She looked through the peephole to see John standing in the hallway, looking like a man headed to his own execution. "I'll call you back," she told Patricia, and opened the door. John stood there holding 2 cups of coffee from the hotel lobby, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked like genuine anguish. "I know you don't want to see me," he said quickly, "but I need you to know something about who I was before today." Jade stepped aside, letting him in. He set the coffee on the small table by the window and sat down heavily in the chair across from her. "3 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. 25-year marriage. Successful consulting firm. Daughter graduating from law school. I was John Morgan, respected businessman, pillar of the community. He pulled out his phone, showing Jade a photo of a beautiful young woman in a graduation cap and gown, beaming next to a man who looked like a completely different version of the person sitting across from her. Emma, he said softly. My daughter. She's brilliant, compassionate, everything good about this world that I somehow forgot existed. Jade looked at the photo. The John Morgan in it had kind eyes, a genuine smile. He looked like someone she might have actually enjoyed talking to. What happened? She found herself asking. John's laugh was hollow. Life. My firm started losing clients to younger, hungrier competitors. Rebecca, my wife, started looking at me like I was a stranger. Emma got busy with her own life, her own career, and I started feeling irrelevant, invisible. He took a shaky sip of coffee. The divorce papers came last week. 25 years, and Rebecca said she felt like she didn't know who I was anymore. Said I'd become bitter, angry, someone she couldn't recognize. Someone she couldn't recognize. The words echoed in Jade's mind. Wasn't that exactly what she'd been trying to avoid by putting on this uniform? The fear that success had turned her into someone unrecognizable? I've been drinking too much, John continued, making excuses, blaming everyone but myself for why my life fell apart. And today, when I saw you, he looked up, meeting her eyes. I saw someone I could hurt, someone I could make feel smaller, so I could feel bigger. And I took it, like a coward. Jade set down her coffee cup. Do you know what it's like, she said quietly, to spend 30 years proving you belong in rooms where people look right through you? To build an empire and still have moments where you feel like that scared 24-year-old who was told she should stick to serving coffee? John shook his head, but she could see he was trying to understand. I put on this uniform tonight because I wanted to remember what it felt like to just serve people, to be appreciated for something simple and honest. Her voice broke slightly. Instead, I got reminded why I built all those walls in the first place. They sat in silence for a long moment. Two broken people who'd found each other at their lowest points. Emma texted me again, John said finally, showing Jade his phone. She's worried about me. Wants to help. But how do I tell my daughter, my brilliant social justice warrior daughter, that I became the kind of man she fights against? Jade looked at the messages on his phone. Dad, I love you. Whatever's happening, we can fix it together. Please call me. She loves you, Jade said simply. That's something. She loves who I used to be. I don't know if that person still exists. Jade studied his face. The genuine remorse, the self-loathing, the desperate hope that redemption might still be possible. There's something else you should know, she said finally. About today. About what happened on the plane. John looked up, fear flickering in his eyes. It's gone viral. Hashtag Skyline Racism is trending. Videos of you, of what you said to me. They're everywhere. The color drained from John's face completely. Oh God, Emma will see it. Everyone will see it. My life is over. Maybe, Jade said honestly. Or maybe this is where your real life begins. The question is, what are you going to do about it? John stared at her, this woman he'd tried to destroy, who was somehow offering him something that looked like hope. I don't know, he whispered. I honestly don't know. Outside their hotel window, Denver sparkled in the darkness. Somewhere out there, their plane was being repaired. Tomorrow, they'd continue their journey to Los Angeles. But first, They both had to decide who they wanted to be when they got there. At 2:47 a.m., Jade heard soft knocking at her door again. She'd been lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the last 12 hours. When she opened the door, John stood there in wrinkled clothes, his hair disheveled, holding his laptop. "I can't sleep," he said simply. "And I need to show you something." She let him in, noticing he looked like he'd aged 10 years since their earlier conversation. "I've been reading the comments," he said, setting his laptop on the table. "All of them. Every single one." The screen showed Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, dozens of posts with millions of views. Videos of their confrontation taken from different angles, each one showing clearly how professionally Jade had handled his abuse, how cruel and unnecessary his words had been. "Look at this," John said, scrolling to a particular comment thread. His voice was thick with emotion. "This woman, she says watching you handle that situation with such grace reminded her of her mother, who cleaned offices at night to put her through college. This guy here, he says seeing someone like you stay dignified in the face of hatred gave him hope." Jade leaned closer to read. Comment after comment praised her composure, her professionalism, her strength. But they also revealed something else. Story after story of people who'd faced similar moments, who'd been reduced to stereotypes and assumptions, who'd found inspiration in watching someone refuse to be broken by hatred. "And then there's this," John said quietly, scrolling to another section. The comments about him were brutal, unforgiving, calling for his job, his reputation, his complete destruction. "I deserve every word," he said. "But Emma," his voice cracked, "she's going to see this. Her friends, her colleagues, everyone she respects. Her father became a hashtag for racism." Jade looked at him, really looked at him. 3 hours ago, she might have felt satisfied seeing him face consequences. Now, watching him break apart, she felt something unexpected, compassion. "Have you called her?" she asked. "I can't. How do I explain this? How do I tell her that everything she thought she knew about me was wrong?" Jade was quiet for a long moment. Then she closed his laptop and sat across from him. "Can I tell you something? About my father?" John nodded. "He was a mechanic. Worked on airplanes, actually. Small regional airport in Georgia. When I was 8, I watched him get passed over for promotion after promotion. Men with less experience, less skill, but the right color skin moving up while he stayed exactly where he was." She pulled her legs up onto the chair, wrapping her arms around them, a gesture that made her look younger, more vulnerable. "I asked him once why he didn't just quit, find somewhere that would appreciate him. You know what he said?" John shook his head. He said, "Baby girl, the world's going to try to tell you who you are your whole life. Your job isn't to prove them wrong. Your job is to prove yourself right." She smiled softly at the memory. "I built this company thinking I was proving myself right. But tonight, I realized I've spent so much time building walls to keep out the John Morgans of the world that I forgot what I was actually fighting for." "What do you mean?" Jade gestured at the laptop. "All those people commenting. They're not just angry at you. They're sharing their own stories. A flight attendant in Dallas who gets harassed weekly. A hotel clerk in Miami who smiles through insults every day. A nurse in Seattle who gets questioned about her competence because of her accent." She leaned forward. "I became CEO to have power, to never be powerless again. But real power isn't hiding behind titles and corner offices. It's standing in that airplane galley, wearing this uniform, and refusing to let someone else's hatred change who you are." John was quiet for a long time. I don't think I've ever had that kind of strength. You don't know because you've never needed it. You've lived your entire life in a world designed for people who look like you. But that world is changing, John. The question is whether you're going to fight that change or learn to be part of something better. At 3:15 a.m., room service arrived with the strangest order they'd probably ever delivered to the airport hotel. 2 cups of hot chocolate and a plate of cookies, requested by the CEO of a major airline and the man who'd racially abused her earlier that day. Emma used to love hot chocolate, John said, cradling his mug. When she was little, she'd insist on making it herself. Always put in too many marshmallows, got it all over the kitchen. Rebecca would get so frustrated, but I loved watching Emma's face when she took that first sip, like she'd created magic. When did you stop seeing that magic in her? Jade asked gently. John's face crumpled. I don't know. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing her as my little girl and started seeing her as evidence of my failure. She was out there changing the world while I was losing everything I thought made me important. What if, Jade said carefully, what happened today could be the beginning of becoming the father she needs instead of the father you think you're supposed to be? How? I'm about to be the most hated man in America. My consulting firm is finished. Rebecca will probably use this in the divorce to take everything. Emma will be embarrassed to share my last name. Jade set down her mug and looked at him directly. Or you could own it. All of it. You could use this moment to become someone worth being proud of. I don't understand. Tomorrow morning, we get on that plane. You could spend the next 6 hours hiding, making excuses, hoping this blows over. Or, she paused, choosing her words carefully. You could spend it figuring out how to turn the worst moment of your life into something that actually matters. John stared at her. You're talking about publicly apologizing, taking responsibility. I'm talking about growth. Real growth. The kind that might actually mean something to your daughter. At 4:30 a.m., they were both exhausted, but neither wanted to end the conversation. They'd moved from the table to sitting on the floor, their backs against the bed, sharing stories neither had planned to tell. You know what's funny? Jade said, I haven't talked to someone like this in years. Really talked. My whole life is strategic conversations, board meetings, networking events. Everything has an agenda. What's your agenda here? John asked. Jade considered the question. I want to remember why I loved flying in the first place, before it became about proving something, when it was just about helping people get where they needed to go. And I want to become someone my daughter could be proud of again, John said quietly. I just don't know if it's possible. It's possible, Jade said with certainty. But it's going to be hard, and it's going to hurt, and you're going to have to mean it. John looked at this remarkable woman who had every reason to destroy him and was instead offering him something he didn't deserve, a chance at redemption. Why are you helping me? He asked. After everything I said, everything I did to you, why aren't you letting me burn? Jade was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunrise begin to paint the Denver skyline through their hotel window. Because, she said finally, the little girl who wanted to fly planes dreamed of a world where everyone could be their best self. And maybe it's time the CEO remembered what that little girl knew. Outside, Flight 447 was being prepared for departure. In a few hours, they'd be back in the air, heading toward whatever came next. But for the first time in months, both of them had hoped that whatever came next might actually be better than what came before. The boarding announcement for Flight 447's continuation to Los Angeles came at 7:30 a.m. Jade had barely slept, but she felt more awake than she had in months. She'd made a decision during those early morning hours with John. She was going to finish this flight as Jade the flight attendant, not Jay, Walter the CEO. She met the crew in the hotel lobby, Maria rushing over with obvious relief. "Jade, how are you holding up? The whole situation yesterday was just awful. That passenger was completely out of line." "I'm okay," Jade said, adjusting her uniform, ready to get everyone home. What she didn't expect was the crowd of reporters waiting at the gate. "There she is," someone shouted. "That's the flight attendant from the video." Jade froze as cameras flashed and microphones were thrust toward her face. A dozen reporters swarmed around her, shouting questions over each other. How did it feel to be racially abused at 30,000 feet? What do you think should happen to the passenger? Are you planning to sue Skyline Airways? Miss, just one comment. Airport security rushed to create a barrier, but the damage was done. Jade found herself at the center of a media circus she'd never anticipated. In the chaos, she caught sight of John across the terminal, also surrounded by reporters, his face pale with terror. "No comment," Jade said firmly, pushing through to the gate. "No comment." But as she walked, she heard one of the reporters on his phone. "Yeah, we've got both of them. The flight attendant and the racist passenger. This story's going to explode even bigger. I'm hearing the passenger is some big shot consultant. John Morgan from Morgan Strategic." "Wait, what? Are you sure?" Jade's blood ran cold. "Sources are saying the flight attendant isn't who she appears to be. We're getting reports that she might actually be." The reporter's voice faded as Jade hurried toward the jet bridge. But she wasn't fast enough. 20 minutes into the flight, Jade was in the galley preparing the beverage service when Maria appeared beside her, holding her phone with a stricken expression. "Jade," she whispered urgently, "you need to see this." The screen showed a breaking news alert. Skyline Airways CEO Jade Walter revealed AS flight attendant in viral racism video. Below it was a photo of Jade from last year's shareholders meeting, clearly showing it was the same woman from the airplane videos. "Oh my God," Maria breathed. You're the CEO?" This whole time, Jade's carefully constructed cover was disintegrating in real time. She could see other crew members crowding around phones, passengers starting to whisper and point. The story was spreading through the cabin like wildfire. "Ma'am," a passenger in row 15 called out. "Excuse me, are you really the CEO of this airline?" All eyes turned to Jade. The secret she'd protected for 12 hours was gone, stripped away by the relentless hunger of social media and 24-hour news cycles. Before she could respond, John appeared at the galley entrance. His face was ashen, and he was holding his phone like it contained his own death sentence. "They know who you are," he said quietly. "I can see that." "No, you don't understand." His voice was shaking. "They know everything. About me, about you, about—" He looked around at the listening passengers and crew. "Can we talk? Privately?" Jade nodded toward the rear galley, and they moved away from curious ears. "Emma called me," John said, his voice breaking. "She saw the news. She knows about yesterday, about who you are, about everything. And God, Jade, she hung up on me. My own daughter hung up on me." He showed her his phone. 17 missed calls from reporters, text messages from colleagues, from friends, from his ex-wife, all of them saying the same thing. "How could you do this?" "It gets worse," he continued. "My consulting firm fired me an hour ago. Over the phone. 20 years with the company, and they said they can't be associated with someone who displays such fundamental character flaws. Rebecca's lawyer is already calling this a pattern of abusive behavior for the divorce proceedings. Jade felt something cold settling in her stomach. John, but the worst part, he interrupted, is what they're saying about you. He pulled up another news article. The headline read, "Publicity Stunt or Real Racism? CEO's Undercover Flight Raises Questions." Jade read in horror as the article speculated that the entire incident might have been staged for publicity, that she'd orchestrated the confrontation to generate sympathy and positive press for Skyline Airways. Social media was already picking up the theory, with hashtags like #FakeRacism and #HostStunt trending alongside the original #SkylineRacism. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she whispered. "This is why I can't." "Jade, listen to me," John said urgently. "I can fix this. I can tell everyone that you had nothing to do with it, that you were just doing your job, that I was the one who—" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Don't you understand? It doesn't matter what you say now. The story is out of control. My board is probably calling an emergency meeting as we speak. The media has turned this into a circus, and we're both the main attractions." She could feel everything she'd built starting to crumble. 23 years of work, of proving herself, of breaking barriers, all potentially destroyed because she'd wanted one night to remember who she used to be. "I should never have talked to you last night," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I should never have let my guard down. I knew better. I always know better." John's face crumpled. "Jade, please. Don't let this destroy what happened between us. It was real. The conversation, the connection." "The connection?" Jade laughed bitterly. "The connection between a racist passenger and the CEO he attacked. That's the story now, John. That's what this has become." She could see passengers straining to listen, phones out, probably live streaming their conversation. Every word would be dissected, analyzed, turned into content for the endless cycle of outrage and judgment. "I have to think about my company," she said, her voice getting colder, more controlled. "About my employees, my shareholders, my reputation. I can't afford to be associated with this mess." The words hit John like physical blows. "So that's it. Everything we talked about, everything we shared, you're just going to throw it away because it's inconvenient." "It's not inconvenient, John. It's career suicide. And I've worked too hard to let one mistake destroy everything." "One mistake?" His voice rose. "Is that what I am to you now?" The galley fell silent. Even the passengers had stopped pretending not to listen. "Yes," Jade said quietly, the lie tasting like poison in her mouth. "You're a mistake I can't afford to make." John stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something die behind his eyes. The hope, the connection, the possibility of redemption, all of it extinguished by her need to protect herself. "I see," he said finally. "The CEO is back. And the person I talked to all night? She never really existed, did she?" Without waiting for an answer, he turned and walked back to his seat, leaving Jade standing alone in the galley, surrounded by whispers and stares and the wreckage of the one genuine connection she'd made in years. She'd saved her reputation. She'd protected her career. She'd done exactly what any smart CEO would do. So why did she feel like she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life? The rest of Flight 447 passed in suffocating silence. Jade went through the motions of service, beverages, snacks, safety checks, while feeling like she was drowning in plain sight. Every passenger seemed to be watching her, recording her, waiting for her to crack under the pressure of being the unwilling star of the Internet's latest obsession. In seat 2A, John stared out the window at the clouds below, his phone turned off, his world reduced to the space between his heartbeat and the constant loop of Jade's words. "You're a mistake I can't afford to make." As they began their descent into LAX, Jade caught glimpses of the media circus waiting on the ground. News vans, photographers, reporters with satellite trucks, all there for her story, their story, the story that had spiraled completely beyond their control. The plane touched down at 3:47 p.m. Pacific time. Jade knew that the moment she stepped off this aircraft, she'd stop being Jade the flight attendant forever. She'd be Jay, Walter again, CEO, with all the armor and isolation that came with it. But first, she had a phone call to make. "Patricia, it's me." "Jade, thank God. Where have you been?" "The board is in emergency session. The stock price is fluctuating wildly, and we've got 3 different law firms wanting to represent us for the media nightmare. Also, marketing wants to know if we're going to lean into this as a diversity initiative or—" "Patricia, stop." "What?" "I said stop. All of it. Cancel the emergency session. Tell the lawyers we'll call them back. And tell marketing that if I hear the word initiative, I'm going to scream." There was silence on the other end of the phone. "Jade, are you okay? You sound different." Jade looked around the galley, where she'd spent the last 18 hours rediscovering parts of herself she'd forgotten existed, where she'd connected with passengers as people instead of profit margins, where she'd felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with stock prices or board meetings. "I'm fine, Patricia, but I need you to set up a press conference. Today, 6 p.m. at LAX. What are you planning to say?" Jade closed her eyes. The truth. John's phone had been buzzing nonstop, even though he'd turned off notifications. He finally powered it on to find 247 missed calls, 1,832 text messages, and an inbox full of emails that ranged from death threats to interview requests to his daughters, friends asking if he was really that racist guy from a plane. But there was one message that stopped him cold. "Dad, I saw the news. All of it. I'm disappointed and hurt and angry. But I also remember the man who taught me that everyone deserves dignity, who cried when he walked me down the aisle at my friend's wedding because her father couldn't be there. I don't know who you were yesterday, but I still believe in who you can be tomorrow. I love you. Call me when you're ready to be that person again. Emma." John read the message 3 times, tears blurring his vision. His brilliant, compassionate daughter was offering him something he didn't deserve, another chance. He looked across the cabin toward the galley, where Jade was talking quietly on her phone. The woman who'd shown him more grace in 12 hours than he'd shown anyone in months. The woman he'd insulted, apologized to, connected with, and then watched retreat behind walls he'd helped her build. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers began gathering their belongings, eager to escape the plane that had become a pressure cooker of controversy and judgment. John remained in his seat until the cabin was nearly empty. Then he walked to the galley. "Jade." She looked up from her phone, and he could see exhaustion etched in every line of her face. "I wanted to say something before we—" He gestured toward the exit, where they could see reporters gathered beyond the gate. "Before all of this becomes whatever it's going to become. John, I told you. I know what you told me, and I understand why you said it, but I need you to know that last night, talking with you, seeing who you really are beneath all the titles and armor, that was the most real conversation I've had in years, maybe in my life." Jade looked away. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. And I think, despite what you said, it matters to you too. He pulled out his phone, showing her Emma's message. My daughter still believes in me. After everything I've done, everything I've become, she still thinks I can be better. You know why? Jade shook her head. Because you reminded me that person still existed. In that hotel room, when you could have destroyed me, but chose to help me instead, you showed me what real strength looks like. What real power is. The galley was empty now except for them. Through the windows, they could see the media frenzy building at the gate. I'm going to face those reporters, John continued. And I'm going to tell them exactly what happened. All of it. The racism, the apology, the night we spent talking, your kindness, when I deserved none. I'm going to take responsibility for my actions and make it clear that you were nothing but professional throughout. John, you don't understand. The board, the shareholders, will see their CEO as someone who maintained dignity under attack and showed compassion to someone who didn't deserve it. If they can't see that as strength, then they don't deserve you. Jade stared at him. Why would you do that? It won't save your reputation. Your career is already over, and this will just make the scrutiny worse. John smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since the airport lounge 24 hours earlier. Because Emma's watching, and I want her to see her father do something right for once. Even if it's too late for everything else, maybe it's not too late for that. He started to leave, then turned back. I know you think last night was a mistake, but it wasn't for me. Meeting you, the real you, not the CEO or the flight attendant, but the woman who remembered why she wanted to fly in the first place. That was the best thing that's happened to me in years. I won't let the world turn that into something ugly. As he walked away, Jade felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, but opening. Like sunlight finding its way through armor she'd worn. For so long she'd forgotten it wasn't really her skin. She watched John Morgan, the man who'd called her racial slurs 18 hours earlier, walked toward the exit with his shoulders straight, ready to face the consequences of his actions and defend her integrity at the cost of his own. And she realized she had a choice to make. She could walk off this plane as J. Walter, CEO, surrounded by security and lawyers, protected from the mess, but isolated from the meaning. She could manage this crisis the way she'd managed every other crisis, strategically, coldly, effectively. Or she could walk off as the woman she'd been in that hotel room at 4 a.m., drinking hot chocolate and remembering what it felt like to connect with another human being. The woman who'd chosen compassion over calculation, who'd offered redemption instead of revenge. The woman who'd almost forgotten she could be. Jade looked at herself in the galley's metal surface one last time. Still wearing the flight attendant uniform, still carrying the weight of both identities. But now she knew which one felt like home. She made her choice. LAX Terminal, Gate 47B, 4:45 p.m. The media scrum was unlike anything LAX had seen outside of celebrity scandals. Reporters 3 deep, cameras from every major network, photographers jostling for position. The crowd parted as John Morgan emerged from the jet bridge alone, walking directly toward the microphones with the steady gait of a man who'd found his footing. Mr. Morgan, do you have a statement about yesterday's incident? John stopped at the improvised podium someone had set up, looking directly into the cameras. Behind him, other passengers hurried past, phones out, recording everything. Yes, I do, he said clearly. My name is John Morgan, and yesterday I became something I never thought I could be. A man who used another person's race as a weapon to make myself feel powerful. The crowd of reporters fell silent. I want to be absolutely clear about what happened on Flight 447. I was drunk, angry about my personal problems, and when I saw Jade, the flight attendant who was serving first class, I made assumptions based on her appearance and decided to hurt her because I could. There was no provocation. She was nothing but professional, courteous, and kind. What I did was racism, pure and simple. Camera flashes exploded around him. Reporters started shouting questions, but John held up his hand. I'm not done. I know there's speculation about whether this was staged, whether Ms. Jade was somehow complicit in creating this situation for publicity. That's absolutely false. She had no idea who I was, and I had no idea who she was. She was simply doing her job when I decided to abuse her in front of 300 people. John's voice broke slightly. I want my daughter, Emma, who's watching this, to know that the man who raised her to believe in equality and dignity is still in here somewhere. And I want everyone else to know that there's no excuse for what I did. None. I'm in therapy as of today. I'm donating my severance package to organizations that fight racial discrimination, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become someone worthy of the forgiveness I don't deserve but desperately hope for. The questions erupted around him, but John was already walking away, pulling out his phone to call his daughter. 20 minutes later, the crowd had grown larger when Jade emerged from the terminal. She'd changed out of her flight attendant uniform and into jeans and a simple blazer. Not the power suit of a CEO, but not the service uniform either. Something in between. Something that was just her. She walked directly to the microphones, and the noise level dropped to complete silence. Good afternoon. My name is Jade Walter, and I'm the CEO of Skyline Airways. I'm also the flight attendant you've all been talking about. She looked directly into the cameras, her voice steady and clear. 23 years ago, I started my career as a flight attendant because I loved the idea of helping people get where they needed to go. Yesterday, I put that uniform back on for the first time in 2 decades because I wanted to remember who I was before I became who I thought I needed to be. A reporter called out, Ms. Walter, was this a publicity stunt? Jade smiled, not the practiced smile of media training, but something real and warm. If it was a publicity stunt, it was a terrible one. I got racially abused in front of 300 people, spent 12 hours hiding my identity, and watched my company's stock price fluctuate wildly while conspiracy theories spread on social media. There were chuckles from the crowd. What happened on Flight 447 was not planned, not coordinated, not designed for any purpose except one man's need to hurt someone he perceived as powerless. Mr. Morgan has taken responsibility for his actions, and I commend him for that courage. Another reporter, what's your response to his behavior yesterday? Jade paused, thinking of the broken man in the hotel hallway, the redemption she'd witnessed, the choice he'd made to face his demons publicly. Yesterday, John Morgan was the worst version of himself. Today, he's choosing to become the best version. That's not easy. It's not comfortable, but it's what growth looks like. And I have nothing but respect for someone willing to do the hard work of becoming better. The crowd erupted with follow-up questions, but Jade continued, I also want to address something else. The speculation that this incident was staged reveals something troubling about how we process experiences of discrimination. When someone faces racism, our first instinct shouldn't be to question whether it really happened or whether they deserved it. It should be to listen, to learn, and to do better. Her voice grew stronger. I'm not a perfect CEO. I'm not a perfect person. But I am someone who believes that dignity, respect, and second chances aren't luxuries. They're necessities. For all of us. A young reporter near the front called out, "What happens now with your company?" Jade looked thoughtful. "We're implementing a comprehensive program for de-escalation training, bias awareness, and conflict resolution for all our staff. We're also creating a fund to support employees who face discrimination, and we're partnering with organizations that promote equity in the workplace." "And personally?" another reporter asked. "Will you continue working as a flight attendant?" Jade laughed, a sound of pure joy that surprised everyone, including herself. "No, I think my crew chief days are behind me. But I will be flying coach more often. It's amazing what you learn about your own company when you experience it the way your customers do." 3 months later, Skyline Airways corporate headquarters. Jade stood in her corner office, looking out at the planes taxiing below. Her assistant knocked and entered. "The quarterly numbers are in," Patricia said. "Stock price up 12%, customer satisfaction at an all-time high, and that diversity initiative has been picked up by 6 other major airlines." "It's not an initiative, Patricia. It's just doing better." Patricia smiled. "Right. Also, you have a visitor." Jade turned, and John Morgan walked in, carrying a bouquet of flowers and looking nervous. "I hope it's okay that I came," he said. "I know you're busy, and after everything." "It's more than okay," Jade said warmly. "How are you? How's Emma?" John's face lit up. "She's good. Really good. We talk every day now. She's proud of me, she says. First time in years I've felt like I deserved that." He set the flowers on her desk. "These are from her, actually. She wanted to thank you for giving her father back." Jade felt tears prick her eyes. "You did that yourself, John. With your help. Your example." He paused. "I start a new job Monday. Nonprofit work, helping people transition out of addiction. It doesn't pay much, but it matters," Jade finished. "It matters." They stood in comfortable silence, looking out at the planes below. "You know," John said quietly, "I never properly thanked you. For that night in Denver. For showing me that it's possible to choose who you want to be, even after you've been someone terrible." Jade turned to face him. "You thank me by becoming someone worth believing in." "I have a confession," John said, pulling out his phone. "Emma made me promise to ask you something." "What?" "She's getting married next month. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. She wanted me to ask if you'd consider, if you might want to come, as our guest. She says any woman who could show her father such grace deserves to see him walk her down the aisle as the man he was meant to be." Jade felt her breath catch. "John, you don't have to answer now. But she wanted you to know that you're not just the CEO who handled a crisis well, or the flight attendant who faced discrimination with dignity. You're the person who helped her get her father back, and that makes you family." Jade looked at this man who'd called her racial slurs 6 months ago and was now inviting her to his daughter's wedding. At the journey they'd both taken from their worst moments to something that looked like hope. "I'd be honored," she said. 6 months after Flight 447, Emma Morgenstern stood at the altar in a garden in Pasadena, watching her father walk toward her with steady steps and clear eyes. In the third row sat Jade Walter, CEO of Skyline Airways, crying happy tears and marveling at the strange and beautiful ways that broken people could help each other heal. As John placed his daughter's hand in her fiancé's, he caught Jade's eye and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Jade mouthed back, "Thank you too." Because sometimes the worst flight of your life can teach you the most important thing you'll ever learn. That dignity isn't something you have. It's something you choose. Every day, in every interaction, with every person who crosses your path. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, choosing dignity in your darkest moment can light the way for someone else to find their way back to the light. The reception lasted until midnight. Jade danced with Emma's father-in-law, laughed with the bridesmaids, and listened to John give a toast about second chances and the people brave enough to offer them. When she finally left, she drove straight to LAX, not to catch a flight, but to sit in the terminal and watch people. Families reuniting, business travelers rushing to meetings, couples beginning adventures, friends saying goodbye. All of them getting where they needed to go. All of them carrying stories of heartbreak and hope, of failure and redemption, of moments when strangers became saviors and enemies became friends. All of them human. Jade smiled, pulled out her phone, and booked herself a coach seat on the next flight to anywhere. Because she'd learned that sometimes the best way to remember who you are is to sit next to someone who has no idea who you're supposed to be. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, that stranger might need exactly what you have to offer. Proof that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Flight attendants, prepare for departure.